everyone, and welcome to the Commons. Thanks for being here tonight. Give yourselves a hand. Good evening. I'm Christopher Beal. I'm a producer, an audio engineer, and sometimes Bay Curious reporter here at KQED. And sometimes I help put together live events like this one. It was my honor to produce this event tonight for KQED, along with my co-producer, who's backstage working hard, Yohan Martinez. Give it up for Yohan. And our host tonight, who you're going to meet shortly. But first, KQED is Northern California's PBS and NPR member station, and it's our mission to inform, inspire, and involve. Our live events program aims to bring that mission to the stage. You can check out our full lineup of performances, food tastings, trivia nights, and more at kqed.org/live. Do it now. Raise your hand if you're already a member of KQED. Oh, that's a lot of hands. I love that. Well, if your hand didn't go up, first, ask yourself why. And second, we'd love for you to become a member. Supporting KQED means supporting local journalism that truly matters. Plus, when you join, you get access to some pretty sweet perks, like getting advance notice of free KQED events. Scan this QR code to become a member or visit kqed.org/donate. And any chocolate lovers here? Yeah, about as many as KQED members. I like that. One of the benefits of becoming a member through this QR code is if you donate $150 a year, you're going to get a KQED artisanal chocolate bar. It's made by Malena from The Chocolate Bar, an East Bay chocolate company who's been featured on our stages and has notes of ginger and coffee to reflect the global nature of the Bay. So that's a delicious reason to sign up tonight. We want to thank season sponsors that make KQED Live possible. First, the San Francisco Symphony. Yes. We also want to thank our friends at Comcast Business and Genentech. Thank you so much for your commitment to supporting our mission of civic and cultural engagement here in the Bay Area. Are you ready to get started with our tribute to Harvey Milk tonight? Perfect. Well, it's my pleasure to welcome KQED's senior politics editor. He's co-host of the award-winning Political Breakdown podcast. You've probably heard it, and he's your host tonight. It's my friend, Scott Shafer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Christopher. Well, as Christopher said, I cover politics here at KQED. And if you're going to cover politics, you really need to understand what happened in San Francisco in the late 1960s through the 1970s. It was a time of transition in San Francisco. There was a lot of upheaval. We were just off the Summer of Love. The city was attracting hippies and gay people from all across the country. And one of the people it attracted here was Harvey Milk. He grew up in the suburbs of New York City on Long Island. And he was not the Harvey Milk then that we think of today, the icon, the liberal icon of LGBT rights. He joined the Navy when he was a young man. He was dishonorably discharged. He later went to go work on Wall Street as a researcher. He was pretty conservative, relatively conservative. He was a Goldwater Republican, believe it or not. And then as the Vietnam War unfolded, he became a little bit less conservative. And in 1969, he came out to San Francisco with a friend who was working on a local production of the musical Hair. Coincidentally or not, Harvey himself grew a lot of hair around that time. He had a pigtail, ponytail, I should say. And in 1973, he opened up what became an iconic business on Castro Street, the camera store that became a center of activity later. He was flamboyant. He was charismatic. He was very good with the media, knowing how the media worked, attracting media. And he ran for office a few times. He ran twice for the Board of Supervisors and lost. He finally got elected in 1977, a year after losing a race for the state assembly to Art Agnos, actually. But in 1977, the first year that San Francisco had district elections, Harvey Milk was elected to the Board of Supervisors, representing the Castro and other neighborhoods as well. 1 year later, he was dead, along with George Moscone. The two of them, partners in politics, both murdered at City Hall on November 27th, 1978, by one of their colleagues, Dan White, former member of the Board of Supervisors, who was very unhappy about not being reappointed by the mayor to the board after he had resigned. I came to San Francisco in 1981, and the murders were still fresh in people's minds, as was the very light sentence that Dan White got. He only served about 5 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter. And so much has happened since that time. We went through the AIDS epidemic, lost so many people. There's also been a lot of progress, LGBT rights, same-sex marriage, marriage equality. We have 3 openly gay governors now. We have a dozen or more members of the LGBTQ caucus in Sacramento. We have a terminal at SFO named after Harvey Milk. There is a U.S. naval ship named after Harvey Milk. Yeah, give it up for the USS Harvey Milk. So Harvey's birthday is tomorrow. He would be 95 years old. What would he make of all this? Well, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We are going to delve into Harvey's life, his legacy, what the meaning of his work and death, his life's work means to us today in this year, 2025, and some of the echoes, perhaps, that we're hearing today from back in 1978 and around that time. So a little bit later, we're going to be joined by some people who knew Harvey Milk, who worked with him to help defeat Prop 6, the Briggs initiative in 1978. But you know, one thing that Harvey loved was opera. And we're very happy tonight to get a sneak preview of 2 arias from Harvey Milk Reimagined. The original Harvey Milk opera debuted in 1995 with the Houston Opera and also played here with the San Francisco Opera. But we're going to hear an aria from the program, and this is Opera Parallèle, who's here tonight. And this first aria we're going to hear is Harvey reflecting on his life as a gay man, a Jewish man, somebody who is emerging as an openly gay person. So please welcome Michael Kelly singing the part of Harvey Milk and Kevin Korth on the piano.
My forefathers crossed a sea of reeds. My grandfathers crossed the Atlantic. What great waves am I making? I have been given great gifts, eyes to see, hands to hold instead of hide, a heart to and I have walked away from each of my lovers. Shut my eyes, lied to myself, lied to my family, forgotten who I am. I'm I stand up for myself as a Jew. Why not as a man who loves men? My star is a pair of triangles, one pink, one yellow. They overlap as I do. I am one person. I am just one person, but I have power. I remember who I am. I remember my name, my people, our histories. I remember my name, my people, our histories, our histories. I remember,
Michael Kelly and Kevin Korth, Opera Parallèle. They'll be back a little while later for a second aria that we're going to hear toward the end of the program. And I'll be talking with Stewart Wallace, who's the composer as well. But right now we want to bring out a couple of people who have firsthand knowledge, who knew Harvey Milk, who worked with him. There aren't many of those folks left. Of course, the AIDS epidemic took many of them, and time as well. But Gwen Craig and Tom Amiano both worked with Harvey Milk to defeat Proposition 6, which was placed on the ballot by State Assemblyman John Briggs, who was hoping to use it as a platform, a springboard to become governor of California. And that ballot measure would have banned openly gay teachers from public schools. Tom, at that time, was a school teacher. And Gwen was a political activist. Tom later was elected to the school board, later the board of supervisors, and went on to also serve in the state assembly. Gwen remained deeply involved in politics with the Harvey Milk Democratic Club and many good causes, elections and campaigns. Please welcome Gwen Craig, Tom Amiano. Well, how does it feel to be the elder statespeople?
I promise not to sing.
Tell us first about, you came, I think, Gwen, to San Francisco in 1975-ish?
Correct.
Yeah, from Chicago.
Yes.
Tell us, what was going on in the city at that time?
Well, it was a city that was thriving and bustling. It was everything that I thought I might find. The neighborhood that I wound up moving into, quite by accident really, was the Castro. It was just by happenstance and good things happening to me. And the Castro at that time was a very mixed neighborhood. It wasn't quite the gay metropolis yet, and there were a
Kind
lot
of
of
Irish neighborhood?
yes, and there were a lot of straight families, a lot of baby strollers being pushed in the neighborhood, and the sort of gay influx had just really started to happen in San Francisco. And so while there were, some gay bars in the neighborhood, and they were very prominent, you could hear the music out on the sidewalks and all. There weren't as many as there came to be, certainly, and as there are today. And, but I was just so struck by how welcoming people were, that people just seemed to adjust to these new neighbors that they had. And so I was just so taken by how homogeneous it all was, having moved there from Chicago, where I'd lived for 6 years, and the balkanization of that city, and to come here and find that there just seemed to be a lot more harmony and unity, the kind of things that we'd heard San Francisco was famous for.
Yeah. Tom, you came much earlier in 1963, I think it was.
1863.
18 during the Civil War. That's right. How did you were a teacher? You were a public school special education teacher.
Yeah, but that was a little bit later.
Okay, so tell us about your life in the city in the 60s. What was it like, and how did you meet Harvey?
Well, I came from New Jersey, so that kind of set the stage. I had read in a magazine when I was in the closet, although everybody else didn't think I was in the closet. And I read in this magazine there were Turkish bathhouses in San Francisco, and many homosexuals frequented these bathhouses. And I looked around me in Newark, New Jersey, and I thought, this is definitely worth the price of a Greyhound ticket. So coming here was biological. I think undertone political, but not manifested yet. And frankly, I thought it was the most dreary place I'd ever been. It was cold. There was fog. And unlike when I think I know you'll be shocked by this. I think I put people off. I was just loud and New Yorky and all that. But I did manage to make friends, and that was the best thing that ever happened, because if you feel so actualized. Mm-hmm. And then when Harvey did arrive, it just seemed like this is right. This is how it should be.
Yeah. What was your first impression of him? How did you meet him?
I just loved him. I cruised him. He was very, very handsome. But the best thing for me was that he was from the East Coast. Because a lot of the boys that came were from Nebraska and stuff, and there's certain sensibilities that we all have. And Milk just had it. He had the smile. He had what the kids call Riz today. And, he was unfinished. And that made him even more attractive.
Yeah.
So it was a turn on.
And Gwen, you were living in the Castro, I think 18th and Hartford.
That's
you had a
right,
nice little
yeah.
space.
Yeah.
And so the camera store was pretty close, like just a block or so away. How did you end up in the camera store? Is that where you met him?
Yes, because, around the time that Anita Bryant was doing her thing in Dade County, Florida. And
By the way, here's a picture that we're seeing now of you.
oh,
with
yeah.
during the Prop 6 fan paper. I
Yeah.
interrupted you. Go ahead.
So she was stirring up all this anti-gay homophobia and, political backlash in Florida. And people were getting very worried and nervous and wondering how we needed to respond to all of that. And a lot of rallies were being held in San Francisco, and new organizations were starting to form. And I went to one of the big meetings that was held, and the organizations was starting to formulate. And I did a lot of mouthing off about, we're really going to need to respond in the media. This is going to take a media campaign, to really address this. And after I said it more than once, finally they said, well, why don't you do that? And I left there as the media coordinator for this new campaign. And I thought, oh gosh, what am I going to do? You know,
Did
what does a
Harvey
media
teach you
coordinator do? So I wound up going to the camera store where I knew Harvey Milk was, and I knew nobody knew how to get media like Harvey Milk. And so I walked in and told him what had happened, and now I'm this media coordinator. And he just swept me into the back of the camera store and took me under his tutelage from that point forward and gave me his map about how to get around to all the TV stations and radio net stations and newspaper offices, and gave me all of his resources, which came to be a great asset later on. And, you know, from then on, I had this relationship with him, and that fed into a number of things to come.
Yeah. So he had run, as I said earlier, ran for office a couple of times, 3 times, and lost. And Tom, in 1978, the Briggs Initiative is on the ballot. You're a school teacher. You've got a target on your back, in a sense.
Yeah.
And I think you and Harvey and maybe Hank Wilson co-founded the No on 6 campaign. What were you thinking? Like, what was the strategy?
Well, we were kind of blown away because here in San Francisco in '75, we were able to get our school district to recognize gay teachers. And that was through civil disobedience. And
What did that mean, recognize them?
well, Hank and I started what we thought would take off, you know, Gay Teacher Association. And it was really only about 2 or 3 of us. And we had a lot of pushback from other gay teachers, but they were closeted. And there was also a strain in the gay community of, you know, the people we call the A gays. Don't rock the boat, don't come out, you know what they're saying. And so we wanted to push back against that. And we did manage to get the school board, which was not elected at that time, to include sexual orientation in their non-discrimination clause. And it was a great victory in many ways in the moment. But that was also when we learned just because it's on paper doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, we were quick learners in those days. Yeah. So the Briggs Initiative, we were familiar with the rhetoric and the bigotry, but we thought it had been put behind us because we kind of are insular here in San Francisco. Yeah. So that's where I met Gwen, and man, was she a spark plug. You didn't get away with anything. And we needed that because we were all easily distracted in those days.
Did the campaign have any money, or like what was the strategy?
No, it was truly
Grassroots.
Yeah, not ass.
With plenty of grass.
No, and Harvey was terrible with money. You know,
But people were so concerned and so sort of terrified by this very notion that what had happened in Florida was coming to us, was coming to the state of California. And this very idea that teachers, that people, it was being put on the ballot that if you were lesbian or gay, you could no longer be allowed to be employed as a teacher. And that the idea behind it was that you would automatically be assumed to be a pedophile. That was what people would come to think about you. And that this idea was so repugnant and so threatening. People said, we've got to stop this. We've really got to stop this in its tracks. So the money and the volunteerism was dramatic. It came forth. The fundraising, yes, very grassroots, but very abundant. And so we did get a lot of money from small donors, a lot of it. And we didn't get the corporate donors. We didn't get any of that. We got a couple of people, groups that came through, but most of it came from lesbian and gay people who were just energized that we've got to fight that.
Tom, was at that time was like everyone on the board of supervisors opposed to Prop 6, or was it really more divided? I mean, John Barbagelata, I know, was on there, and he was much more conservative.
Well, he was very homophobic. There is a lot of homophobia and heterosexual privilege in San Francisco. So we really had only scratched the surface. And I think, Milk became the conduit for that. I went to a gay club's endorsement for supervisor, my friend Hank and I, who were elementary school teachers. And it was at a very typical gay bar from that period, red velvet and chandeliers, and day drinking. And they were interviewing for the seat in supervisor, and the fix was in. They were not going to go for Harvey. And the nice guy who ran, his name was Pelosi, by the way, made a nice presentation, boring, but very nice. Harvey gets up there, and he is all over the place. So this was not like his perfect speech. He honed that as he progressed. But what he was putting out there just hit you in the heart and in the gut. This was the guy. We've been waiting for you. I am not worthy, Jesus. I am not worthy. And that was when we became committed. And just one other thing, and you did hit at it. Prop 6 was, very stereotypical. So they were really talking about the men. So Briggs and them, they said, oh, lesbians, we don't, and so that was another thing that you dealt with very well, I thought,
Let's look at some archival footage from that time. This was actually from KQED TV's archives, and you'll maybe recognize the reporter Randy Schultz, who went on to write a biography of Harvey Milk and many other books as well. He worked here at KQED. Let's look at that video.
Such statistics already have politically active gays creating hypothetical scenarios of what would happen if the Briggs Initiative passed. On a state level for it, gay activists have bigger worries about the possibility of the Briggs Initiative carrying here, an idea that no longer seems as outlandish as it once did. What, for example, would happen to the now cordial relationship between the city's elected leadership and the gay community if the Briggs Initiative carried in San Francisco? Also, some gay activists worry that passage of the Briggs Initiative in San Francisco would create a climate for the repeal of the city's newly enacted gay civil rights law.
A lot of them are not going to sit back and be quiet. They're going to be angry and frustrated. We are faced with the possibility, and I must emphasize the word possibility, of another 5 to 10 year struggle like went through with Vietnam, went through the Black Civil Rights Movement.
CVC plans to run a very professional campaign. We've hired a professional campaign manager to effect this. The basic emphasis will be on education. We do hope to raise in the area of $1 million. The majority of that amount of money will be spent in media. There's a lot of education that has to be done. It is also indicated to us that people are virtually turned off by demonstrations. They aren't really ready to be confronted with mass amounts of gay people.
Cisco is just a mess, that it's a den of sinners.
Well, if it's a den of sinners, a lot of people like to come here. Our tourist business is going up every year. The convention centers are being built and everything else. So people may say it's a den of mess, but that's. I could take you to almost every city in New Year's Eve and take films of some of the rowdiness. Or I could take you to almost any city and show you films of crime and say, look what's happening, Sure, within San Francisco there's a certain percentage of gay people who may flaunt it or may exaggerate, and you could just blow it up and say what's happening. In San Francisco, you're talking about 60 to 80,000 gay people who are integrated throughout society and through life. Everything from politicians to doctors to ditch diggers to bus drivers. What's happened in San Francisco is most of them, or a great percentage of them, have come out. And the relationships within the community, the building of bridges that exist, the lifestyle. This street that I live on is maybe 20-25% gay. And yet there are probably more children in the streets playing every day. And the parents love the idea of growing up with the cultures together. And what's happened in San Francisco is that the 15% or 10% of the population that is gay is open about it. An education process has taken place. People have learned to accept, learned to get over the stereotypes, learned to get over the prejudice, and it's a healthy atmosphere that's taking place.
It was great.
The Briggs, go Harvey. Let's hear for Harvey. The Briggs Initiative lost pretty. I would say it was a landslide, by today's standards.
2 to 1.
Yeah.
2 to 1. Yeah. And it had some unusual supporters, the no side. Ronald Reagan, former governor, opposed it. Jerry Brown, of course, was governor. He opposed it. Jimmy Carter was president. He opposed it.
Yeah.
But what role did Harvey play in this? He's only one person. He couldn't go and talk to every voter. So
Right,
what did
right.
he do?
It's funny that Jimmy Carter coming out for it because, you know, there was some lobbying on that end, and Harvey saying something to Jerry Brown being the one to whisper in Carter's ear at the last minute and saying, you know, well, it seems like, you know, it's going to be okay here in California, so I think it's safe for you. And he went back to the podium and said, and by the way, vote no on 6. So
Did he know what even that was, you think?
No.
it's not clear.
Well,
So,
Ronald Reagan came out against it.
Yeah.
yeah.
Which actually made me reconsider. You know, wait a minute. No. It was the tentacles of how the state works, the time, and actually it was visibility. You know, Harvey partnered with Sally Gerhardt and, you know, really kicked ass. And it was very gratifying and affirming because they were really the voices of a lot of people who have been silenced. And to see the media actually deal with them as real people, because a lot of times it was kind of like when Phil Donahue had people on who were, you know, very non-mainstream. People just wanted to see that themselves. And certainly we had a very pronounced lefty gay movement here in San Francisco. And I'm old now, so I can say it. I think San Francisco, the best parts of San Francisco have come out of the left, and particularly those years. It was a team effort, and Milk was the team leader.
Yeah. Gwen, you know, gay men at that time tended to be out in front, you know, on a lot of things for many years after that as well, I will say. But you know, Tom mentioned it, and you mentioned Sally Gerhardt. How were women integrated into the campaign?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, actually, this was during a time when there was a real insistence on what was called co-sexual leadership. And all the organizations at that time, you would find that they would have co-presidents or co-chairs or whatever, and it would always be a lesbian and a gay man. And that was just standard. It was insisted upon. It would be unusual to walk into an organization and it would just be a gay man at the table leading the group. Harvey definitely strictly followed that. There was a fund that was set up before the campaign got underway, the Harvey Milk United Fund. And it was led by Harvey and Sally Gerhardt. And then they became co-chairs of the campaign organization when it got underway. And he made sure that the campaign committee that was formed, not only that it was diverse in terms of ethnicity and the type of people that came from labor and the Democratic Party functions and all sorts of people, but that it also was balanced in terms of gender as well. We were always looking for that sort of balance, and that seemed to be spread throughout the gay community at that end. Lesbian and gay. It was always lesbian and gay. And so when he asked for, you know, he set up who was going to be managing the campaign, he asked me and my friend Bill Krause to be co-managers of the campaign because he thought it was important for the campaign structure at that level as well. So Harvey always insisted upon that. When they went out and did media, it was always Harvey and Sally Gerhardt in every venue, every interview, every debate.
Tom, Gwen made a reference there to labor. And of course, labor and Harvey had quite a coalition around the Coors boycott. He got the bars in the Castro to boycott Coors beer. But talk about his ability to build these coalitions.
You know, what it was for me is, and I think about that a lot today, is he recognized the difference between gay pride and gay liberation. So he knew that gay pride could complement gay liberation, the visibility, the celebration, the affirmation. We needed that. And gay liberation, which he was a practitioner, connected the dots. Today they say intersectionality. But, you know, this not being siloed. There are a lot of people who are disenfranchised, disabled, elderly, working people. So we had that affinity. And it was a very unlikely marriage. But thanks to people like Jim Elliott and others in the labor movement. Alan Baird, both have passed and are lost. They were straight allies. They were needed. And they saw Harvey's humanity. And actually, he didn't equivocate about workers' rights. But if you went to the board at that time, they would not be available, not return phone calls, want to do quid pro quo, et cetera, et cetera. And Harvey's authenticity won over a constituency that people fairly, I think, stereotyped as being toxic masculinity, blue collar. And he went in and he charmed the pants off them. Literally some, but I'm like.
So the defeat of the Briggs Initiative, big celebration, but then there was a major turn in San Francisco emotionally. There was the Jonestown massacre, and then just, you know, a week or two later, the assassinations. Dan White, who had been somewhat friendly with Harvey. I think Harvey had gotten him to vote for something, and Harvey voted for some things that Dan White wanted. Talk about, before we play some of the footage from the assassination coverage, talk about, Tom, the political climate between those two especially.
It was strained. That particular incident, Harvey kind of jumped the gun, said he would vote for something that White was sponsoring. But then when he did his homework, he found out this was not a good thing. So he didn't vote for it, and it lost. And, you know, I'm not Dr. Phil. I would never want to be anyone like him anyway. But, you know, analytically, I think White's world was falling apart. And he had very limited resources emotionally, intellectually. He wasn't the brightest bulb in the world. And really got angry at Harvey, and then particularly the mayor. And everybody kind of deserted. And I'm not justifying anything he did. Dianne Feinstein was a big supporter when his agency started to get diminished and his business that he started to make money failed, and his wife had a special needs child, and you know his whole gestalt was being an Irish working class cop, fireman, military. So very narrow lens, and that blossomed into the pathological hate and then the murders.
Yeah. Let's watch some footage from the archives of that day and the aftermath, including the riots after the very lenient sentence that Dan White got a year later.
Marianne White had commented weeks earlier that her husband had never seemed the same since being elected to the Board of Supervisors. The pressures, frustrations, and financial burden of public life had prompted White to resign his post 2.5 weeks ago, only to seek reappointment 2 days later. Mayor Moscone reportedly told White 1 week ago that there was considerable opposition to the reappointment. The mayor was to announce the appointment of Don Horanzi, a real estate loan officer, to White's post this morning. Moscone's press secretary Mel Wax speculated that White had walked into Moscone's office at 10:45 this morning to ask once again for his job. According to city officials, White met with Moscone in a back conference room of the mayor's office. Shortly after, a series of loud noises were heard by secretaries in the next room, but the body was not discovered until 11 a.m. when aide Rudy Nothenberg walked into the office for a scheduled meeting. White reportedly left the mayor's office through a back entrance, walked across City Hall to the office of former aides, and demanded keys to the supervisor's lounge. Terry Wallen, aide to Supervisor John Molinari, said that White was a wild man. White then let himself into the supervisor's chambers and made his way to the office of Harvey Milk. According to an aide to Supervisor Feinstein, White asked Milk for a private talk in White's former office. Moments later, shots were heard and White was seen running out of the office. An all-points bulletin was immediately issued for White. There was speculation that he might head for the office of the city clerk, who had earlier denied White legal avenues in which to seek reappointment. At approximately 11:45, White walked into the Northern Police Station on Ellis Street, held up his hands, and was taken into custody in the lobby. Officers removed a handgun from White, who then reached into his pocket saying, "Here are the shells." White was then taken to the Hall of Justice, where reporters held vigil for 90 minutes while Inspector Frank Falzon interrogated White. He was later joined by his wife and attorney James Purcell. White was then booked and escorted to the 6th floor jail area. What began as a peaceful protest on Castro Street less than an hour earlier erupted into a violent confrontation when the crowd of demonstrators, many of them gay, made their way to City Hall last night. For more than 2 hours, a small group of several hundred in the crowd battered City Hall windows and doors with rocks and metal bars. Meanwhile, the majority of the demonstrators relied on nonviolent tactics, chanting and forming a human chain in a vain attempt to stop the mob from pummeling City Hall.
Harvey Milk. He held public office less than 11 months, never achieving a station higher than that of San Francisco County Supervisor. But as the gay community observes his 50th birthday, it's clear that Milk has left something of a legacy, not only in the political cause he championed and the neighborhood he pioneered, but in something of a legend that he's left behind as well.
Milk was the first acknowledged gay to seriously seek public office in San Francisco and the nation. First as a mustachioed hippie in 1973, and then through many later defeats. Well, Mayor George Moscone made Milk the first homosexual city commissioner in the country back in 1976, and finally, in 1977, Milk became the first gay to be elected to municipal public office in the United States.
Harvey was the first gay person who, there's no doubt that he was gay, went around to all different kinds of people, labor unions, neighborhood groups. Having broken that ground, gay people are no longer an abstract threat, but an integral part of San Francisco life, and people don't think twice. Well, a lot of people don't think twice now, the fact that gay people can care about child care and good schools and better transportation and the housing crisis and all that.
Today, there's virtually a gay seat on the County Board of Supervisors. A solid gay vote for an essentially unknown homosexual candidate for mayor last year played a key role in deciding the mayor's race. Gays routinely run for public office here now. Their vote is courted by presidential candidates, and Harvey Milk's name is evoked by some of the area's most powerful politicians.
Beyond Milk's political work, there's also a legacy in the Castro neighborhood, the International Center of Gay Life, which Milk helped to establish.
This is how the rundown Castro looked in 1973, when Milk was one of the first gay merchants to open up a shop there. Milk helped form a gay merchants group, one of the nation's first to draw more gay business. And today, Castro Street stands as a paragon of the gay economic power that Milk tried to build. Beyond business, the Castro's macho styles of fashion have been commercialized and marketed worldwide. Internationally, Castro Street is probably the most famous neighborhood in the city, the world's gay mecca.
So, you know, obviously that moment of his assassination and then later the trial and the very light sentence was devastating, and there was a lot of anger. How did the city, how did the community, do you think, pull it back together, Gwen? Was there a moment? Was there a person? Was there a cause?
Well, I think it's almost amazing how Harvey's memory united people over the years so much. You know, Harvey left that recorded last will in which he talked a lot of it dealt with who he wanted to succeed him, as he left it to George Moscone, who he expected would be there to make the appointment, never thinking that he thought he might be assassinated, but never imagining that George Moscone might also be assassinated at the same time. But Harvey also talked about how he wanted to be remembered, how he wanted the movement to go I think he would be amazed to know that he has been remembered so well and so long, and that we know so much about him now, so many years later. I mean, he was killed 47 years ago, and, he would be 95 on his birthday tomorrow. And his nephew, Stewart Milk, formed an organization to spread Harvey's name globally. And there are people in cities around the world now who do commemorations to Harvey Milk, who, you just saw Randy Schultz talk about he never rose above the office of a county supervisor. But he's the most well-known name of a gay person of anyone else who rose to any office, in this country or anywhere else. And I'm so proud of him. I'm so proud that because of what he espoused and what he wanted the movement to be and what it became because of him, that legacy is known. It's sad that it took an assassination to give him that notoriety and that legacy, but that's so important that it did happen and that he does have that impact.
Tom, was his life and part of his legacy your decision to run for office?
Yeah, absolutely, because I thought, what he could have accomplished was so much more, and he knew that. And so to be murdered, and so brutally, and probably with joy, from what I understand, it really sobered people up. And the gay community, I use the term loosely, is not monolithic. There's ethnic differences, language difference, so much. But of course, the murder was so shocking, and we lived in our bubble where nothing like this was ever going to happen. And the mayor as well. We did have quite a moment of unity, and with our straight brothers and sisters as well. And Harvey showed that a vote was important. I really wish that would transfer to today. But people, instead of saying, well, when you vote, nothing happens, they knew that they had Milk and even Moscone because they voted. So out of that came the political muscle of the queer community, even with all its dystopian and fractures, et cetera, and so forth. When it comes to certain burning issues, you do feel that mobilization and that reaching out to other communities.
You said that the city was unified after his death, but Gwen, there was also, when he got into politics, there was a lot of pushback from some of the established members of the gay leadership then. Talk about that. Did he rub people the wrong way, or was he just
well, there's always an old guard that's in place when new people come along with new ideas and breaking into politics. We go through that over and over again. I think we're going through that now. We're going through that on the national scale as we see, young leaders like David Hogg and Malcolm Kenyatta trying to break up, what's been the old guard in the National Democratic Party. And some of that was happening in San Francisco. They saw Harvey Milk as sort of this interloper who wasn't accepting the people who had been there all along and were making up the leadership of democratic institutions and the lesbian and gay institutions, and wouldn't just, wait his turn. So, there was a lot of that was happening. There was this jockeying between the two Democratic clubs, Harvey's new Democratic Club and the one that had existed for so many years before. And there were people who just had this new progressive idea of what the movement should be doing, and not just be accommodationist, but demand more. And Harvey was on the side of demanding more and being bold enough about saying where we should be going, and not just waiting to be given crumbs off the table by politicians, and being polite and being patient. And so, there was still, and to this day, there's really some of that that's left over with people who want to be more standard politicians and not rock the boat and move up the ladder in a way that's a little more moderate, a little more in line with the politicians who are, well, part of the established old guard.
A little.
Okay, a lot.
Yeah.
So
Did they come around, Tom, to him, or was there always, to the day he died, was there that conflict?
No, there was always a pushback, of course, but that livened everybody up. I mean, I think that one of the biggest gifts he gave, aside from his life, was that focus that people wanted. I remember a rally once, I forget what it was terribly homophobic thing happened, and we marched to Union Square. This is really in the early days. And as they were all milling around, okay, we're here, what? And so Harvey stepped out of that crowd, and he made a speech, and he could have spoken in any language. It was the fact that he was there, and he was verifying why we were there, and the anger. So it was definitely a perfect storm. There were organizations like Cops for Christ. There were stickers and flyers put out after the murders. Dan White was right. So it wasn't as if, we were living in Mayville.
Yeah.
All that, and I think many people can identify this. If you're from a particular group, no matter what it is, you get prescient. So the murder of Milk, there was a part of all of us who had experienced the gay experience, and then, of course, transferred to other characteristics. We knew it was going to happen. I hate to say that, but when the first time I heard about it, I knew it. And I think that anger helped solidify. Political marriages don't last very long, but for that one time, the tragedy of Jonestown and the double murders, you did feel like you were part of a community that cared about that.
Yeah.
And we're also worried about the criminal justice system. Is that familiar? Yeah. And we knew that Dan White was, you didn't want to believe it, but we knew he'd get a slap on the wrist.
Yeah. Well, and he, just to finish up his story, I mean, he gets out of prison and commits suicide. He did not get the hero's welcome, quite the opposite. He was shunned, I think, by people and isolated and ended up killing himself. Well, Harvey Milk, as Gwen said, was killed 47 years ago, and the work that he started continued, of course, and it continues to this day. And to talk about that work, his legacy, the impact that it's had here and far away is Honey Mahogany. She's a political activist, a former drag performer, and now director of San Francisco's Office of Transgender Initiatives. Please welcome Honey Mahogany. So, Honey, I know you worked at the board, and I just wonder, I want to ask you about the work you're doing now and the kind of the echoes of what was happening back in Harvey's day. But did his memory loom large at all for people who worked there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that everyone was sort of fascinated about which office did he have, where was his office located. I think actually his office is no longer an office. I think it's actually one of the side rooms. But there was a lot of mystique in that space. And, there's a bust commemorating Harvey Milk there now. And so, especially as someone who is queer, and someone who was politically active, who was president of the Milk Club with his name on it, I felt very connected to that legacy.
Yeah. Now, you grew up in San Francisco in the 80s and 90s, I think it's fair to say. And did his legacy get you involved or interest you in politics at all? Or if not, what did?
I mean, it was, to be fair, I mean, I think I knew about Harvey Milk, actually. Actually, I do remember when I first heard of him was... well, first I should say that I went to Catholic school, K through 12. So I grew up in San Francisco, but I lived a very sheltered life in many ways. But
parents were immigrants, right?
My parents were immigrants from East Africa. They were refugees. Actually, the reason that my family landed in San Francisco was because of Reverend Amos Brown, because at that time he was actually helping a lot of African immigrants who had lost their citizenship due to the, my father was it's hard to talk about now because my father was a student activist and lost his citizenship and therefore was kicked out of his country and was a man without a country and a place to go, and he ended up coming to San Francisco. And so much of what we're talking about today, so much of what's happening right now just feels like it's happened before.
Yeah. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I remember in Harvey's day, you know, it was LG, and even the B, there was resistance to adding bisexual because people thought, oh, they're just chicken gays, you know, they don't want to come out. And, you know, let alone the transgender part.
I know him.
Huh? Yeah, and so, honey, I'm just wondering, like, how did what he did then, do you think, how did it help, you know, clear the way for the kind of work you're doing now, you know, here for the city?
You know, it's interesting because for me, I really obviously have built on, I think, some of the work that Harvey Milk has done. I think that I have benefited from the bricks that he laid down. And I also want to honor, you know, Jose Julio Saria was someone that I also really looked up to, right? I mean, as someone who was a person of color, who was also a drag queen, who ran for office, I think was the first person, openly queer person to run for office, and did not win, but really established the queer community as a constituency to be aware of and to cater to when you're a politician running in San Francisco. And so Milk building on that legacy, right? And then all of the queer work that has happened since with Tom and so many others, I think I really got to benefit from that. I think that, you know, for me, what Harvey really did was make it okay to be queer in San Francisco in a very loud way. I think the call that he made to queer people all over the country to come to San Francisco was something that people heard. And it really gave people hope that even if where they were was painful, even if where they were not accepted, that there was a place that they could someday go to be safe. And, you know, when we founded the transgender district here in San Francisco, I was actually very surprised and touched to see trans people reaching out to us and telling us that, you know, they were living in a small town, that they were afraid to come out to their parents. No one knew that they were trans. But when they saw that there was a transgender district here in San Francisco, that gave them hope. And so, you know, I think the work continues.
Yeah. Do you think, you know, Tom or Gwen, were trans issues something that even crossed Harvey's mind?
Actually, yes. You know, I lived at 16th and Castro, and if you went down to Market, on the corner there across the street was a place called The Shed, and it was after hours. It opened at 2 a.m. I was very young. And
apparently had insomnia.
I had insomnia. Yes. I was out to buy a cigarette, darling, and so we used to go there because you could dance, and a lot of members of the trans community went there because they were not welcome in many of the gay bars. Some of the gay bars had horrible practices, by the way, back in those days. You know, no women, it was bad. But, and that's where I got educated about it. And I know that Harvey sometimes visited The Shed. You know, I make a joke, but we did have a lot of energy. And to be in an area that was a sanctuary, at least feeling that way, you stayed up late. You did what you needed to do, so I know that Harvey's energy would have directed him to late night activities as well. So he knew about the community and its needs, and he was sympathetic. But there was a moment, and you could probably speak to this better. I think there was a silence in and around the struggle. The visibility, I think, the visibility was thwarted. People said, "Well, trans is it gay?" You know, all the different lanes that people put each other in. So the gay community itself, if you were a homosexual gay, men or women, you needed to learn a lot. And it's through perseverance that we are where we are today, and you know about the terrible backlash that is happening. And that means, you know, we're here to stay. But the backlash is very threatening to all of us.
And
To your point, I think you mentioned earlier that we are not a monolithic community, the LGBTQIA+ community, and there's always been tension, I think. I mean, not even taking into consideration bisexual or transgender people, there's been tension between lesbians and gay men. I mean, and so we have had to learn, I think, to not just tolerate each other, but to really learn about each other, to work together, because we see the attacks that happened with the teachers and the accusations of pedophilia and grooming and all of these things. And we're seeing that happen now, of course, with the transgender community, the accusations of grooming and forcing people and converting people to be trans. And so it really is, I mean, there is, we are all in the same struggle, right? And trans people currently, I think, are sort of at the end point or at the pinpoint of that struggle. But it is not something that we as a community haven't dealt with before. And even now, I think that there are conversations within the queer community about, well, should we just have LGB and leave off the T, or should trans people should we get rid of them because, right? I mean, TERFs, but specifically because trans people are so under attack, and they don't want to have trans people weigh down the LGBTQ movement. I mean, these are conversations that are happening right now.
Well, remember Barney Frank tried to do that with ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, and he thought maybe they could get the votes if they just lopped off transgender folks, and there was a huge backlash against that.
But and I think that the lesson is, though, that we are absolutely stronger together, and that unfortunately, when we get in these situations where they are scapegoating a member of our community, that it is just, of course, an excuse. And if the trans community did not exist and wasn't a part of the LGB, well, they've already started to come for gay marriage and many other things.
Yes, they have.
We're in a moment now, as you sort of alluded to, that trans rights and many other things are under attack from the Trump administration. And I'm just wondering, what effect is that having on the work that you do here in San Francisco?
Well, I mean, I think certainly there is an impact. I mean, San Francisco gets, I think, upwards of $2 billion of federal funding. So, cuts to, bans on funding for anything related to DEI. That is terribly hurtful to, I think, the work that we are trying to do, because I believe San Francisco is a place that really believes in diversity, equity, and inclusion, believes in the fact that, we can build a more equitable society, a society that is more fair, that diversity makes us stronger, and, we've tried to really live those values. And so, I think that these proclamations, as they're being tested in court, and as our city is fighting back, and as many city attorneys and attorney generals across the country are doing, it is creating a lot of pain and a lot of uncertainty. That being said, I think we are very proudly here a sanctuary city for trans people. I mean, we have an Office of Transgender Initiatives, we have a transgender district. I think San Francisco in so many ways exemplifies what is possible, because while we hold space for the trans community here, we also do incredible work with cis women. I mean, we have a department on the status of women. We have a WNBA team. We're building an athletic training structure on Treasure Island for women's soccer. And so in so many ways, we are really creating a city that, for women to thrive in, and also for trans people to thrive in. And I think that's, an incredible example to the world.
After the election, after the November election, there was a lot of, there still is a lot of introspection and accusations and speculation about why the Democrats lost the way they did. And of course, one of the issues that some are pointing to is the transgender issue. And Trump used it against Kamala Harris very effectively in an ad that she never really responded to. But I'm wondering, and then we have the governor, saying, which something that a lot of people would agree with, that having trans women participate in sports is unfair to the girls and the women that they play with. What do you make of all that, Tom? You worked up in Sacramento, I know you've gone a few rounds with Gavin Newsom. What do you make of his position on all this?
Well, I'm not surprised, because I did work with the gentleman for many years, and I saw many characteristics that were not manifested publicly, and the gay marriage issue became such a distraction. And I'm certainly happy that it happened, because it was kind of a good FU to the rest of the world. But it was only one small part of the agenda that disenfranchised people have. And so I think that gesture, that stunt, that cleverly crafted political move, or that heavily meaningful thing that he did, whatever the aspect of it that you relate to, you're not going to see, in my mind, a continuity of what people call San Francisco values. The drapes are being measured for the White House. I'm pontificating now, but I think it's a real betrayal. And you know, I was at a fundraiser recently, and there was a very, very funny drag queen, and someone said, "What about Gavin Newsom?" And she said, "Bitch, please." And that's exactly where we're at, and we don't need equivocation. That was bad.
Well, I will also just say you authored one of the facilities bills, right?
Yeah, 1266, but who's counting?
Apparently you are.
Well, can I just say that I get so angry about this issue of trans kids, adult, whomever, participating in sports. It is such a deliberate distraction. Given what we're up against in this country, nobody is losing anything because on the field is a trans adult or kid. And nobody is going to go hungry. Nobody is going to lose anything in terms of their income. Nobody is going to lose anything in terms of their particular rights or economic privilege or any of that. They just choose a topic to make people a little bit confused, afraid, distrustful of their neighbor. What does this mean? I'm not sure I like that. But it means it only is meant to distract people from the bigger problems and the bigger issues that we have in this country, maybe in this neighborhood, maybe just in their school. And so whenever it comes up, I think we have to just dissuade people from the conversation itself, because there's so many more important things. And you know what? Talk to the kids who are on the playing field and ask them how they feel about their trans schoolmate playing with them in that team sport. And you know what? Most of the time you find out they don't care. And that's what's important. Nobody's asking the kids how they feel.
I would also just say really quickly that, you know, I think there is so much misinformation and disinformation purposefully around this issue.
Yes,
I mean, they like to talk about this like this is something that is happening now, that it's a new thing and we've gone too far. No, trans women have been openly competing professionally since 1975.
Absolutely.
Which is before we had decriminalization of gay sex acts, which is before we had gay marriage. It was not an issue. No one really talked about it. And guess what? Trans women were not winning when they were competing. So it was completely a non-issue that they have now realized polls well. And guess what? There is some good messaging, because they can say, oh, well, what do I tell the dad who says that there's a man playing on my daughter's sports team?
Yeah.
You know, and so they have that sort of knee-jerk reaction, but we know that this is the tactic. It's always about the kids. Make people feel insecure or scared for their kids,
Yes.
and they will do whatever you want.
Yes.
Anti-Semitism, all of it.
Yeah. It's always a tactic.
Yeah. I want to bring out the composer, Stewart Wallace, in a moment, just so we can hear some more music. But real quickly, each of you, what of Harvey Milk's philosophy and life is relevant today? Gwen?
Well, you know, Harvey talked a lot about the importance of coming out. And after a while, we thought, you know, this wasn't maybe the most important message, because it seemed almost old-fashioned, almost quaint to say that people needed to come out, that everybody was doing it now, that we were out. We had TV shows, we had movies. You know, we didn't have to. But we've entered back into this time now where people are made to be afraid. It's because of the repressive right. And I think we probably have a lot of kids today, or even adults in some of the more repressive regions of our country, who maybe don't feel as comfortable claiming their lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans identity. And so Harvey's message, unfortunately, about the need to show people their authentic selves, who they really are, and proclaim it and show their pride in their identity is relevant. It showed that it's always been relevant, and it's ever more important today when we need to show the breadth of our diversity.
Tom, real quick.
Oh, yeah. Harvey Milk always said, take the ass out of assimilation. He also, there's a trope about, and it's true, you got to give him hope. But see, what I think he taught me was hope isn't some hallmark ethereal thing. Hope is being knocked down, bloodied, kicked, coming back up, and as the wonderful drag queens say, take out the earrings, rip off the bracelets, get the hairpins, and fight back, get knocked down again, come back up. That's fucking hope.
Honey?
I mean, what more can I say, really? I mean, I think that they've said it all. You know, I think that he is someone who was a coalition builder, and I think that we need that now more than ever. I think that he was someone who encouraged us all to be out and loud and proud, and that we build a better society all together, and I think that's really true. I mean, if you look at what's happening, you know, getting rid of the immigrants, attacking the queer people, all of these things, is our country better for it? No, it is not. Our country is not better for it. Queer people, trans people make our country better. They make it stronger. Immigrants make our country better. They make it stronger. And that's the message that we have to carry forward in these next 3 years.
Well, we're going to hear a little bit more music, but I want to thank each of you, Honey Mahogany, Tom Amiano, Gwen Craig, for your moral clarity and all the work you've done, the public service, your sacrifice, and your being here today to talk about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to go that way.
Don't forget yourself as an out gay man and what you've accomplished here.
Thank you. All right. You forget how much wisdom there is sometimes in the city. It's great to hear that. All right, we're going to wrap up the night with some more music from Opera Parallèle. And we're going to hear another aria. But first, I want to bring out the composer who did the music for the original and now for this reimagined version. Please welcome Stewart Wallace. So, first of all, what made you think that Harvey's life would make a great opera?
Well, we recognized it instantly. David Gockley, who was the head of the San Francisco Opera, but before that he was the head of the opera in Houston. And he offered us a commission, and he changed his mind about what we had offered him. And
what do you mean?
Well, he wanted to do something, he had a different idea in mind, which made me a little prickly. And they said, we have another idea for you. And I said, oh, you do you? And it was Harvey Milk. And I went, oh, that's a great idea. Yeah. And that's how it happened, you know.
Yeah.
I was a student in my first year in college when Milk and Moscone were murdered. And of course, we knew all about it. The minute he said that, it rang of a really great American opera subject.
Yeah. So this is Harvey Milk Reimagined, and we don't need to get into a lot of the details of what's reimagined, but just quickly, like what?
Everything.
Everything?
No, well, yes and no. It's, you know, so, people always like their latest creation, so I think it's the best version. But it is leaner, meaner, tauter, shorter, and I think it's more expressive of the essential parts of the opera. In the process, when we first started the opera, you know, there was a lot of educating we felt we needed to do, and education is not always the best way to make drama. But so there were elements of it that were there to inform. but were not necessarily strongly dramatic. And in this reimagining, those things were cleared away. And then what you have is you have the focus on the trees. The weeds are gone and the trees are there. And the power of the story comes through more clearly.
Well, talk about that power, because the opera debuted in 1995 in the midst of a horrible epidemic. There was no hope, there were no drugs, there was anger at the government that they weren't doing enough at every level. And now here we are today, a very different kind of political environment, but a lot of parallels. Absolutely. What's the significance of the political moment that we're in right now?
Well, we didn't do it for that. I have to say that very clearly. We didn't think, oh, we want to do this because of the political moment. We wanted to do it because we wanted to relaunch the opera into the public imagination and hopefully into the repertoire. That was really the objective. But the times have cooperated, maybe in the worst kind of way, to make the opera, I think, more relevant than ever. And scarier in some ways. I mean, I remember watching, we did this opera, the new version of the opera in St. Louis. It was originally supposed to be here first, but a little problem like the pandemic came in the way. And it was done there, and watching it, I found it more terrifying, both the rhetoric and the violence, than I remembered from when we did it before, even though it was much closer to the events then. The repercussions seem much stronger now.
Yeah. And how do you hope people who go to the opera, hear the music, are touched by it, affected by it?
Well, as a young person, I'm no longer a young person, but as a young person, I thought that with opera we could change the world. I felt, in every possible way. I mean, I really felt we could change the world. Now I'm not, but I still, I think, secretly believe that. And so I hope that people would be moved by the example of somebody who decided that he could exercise his own power to make change around him. And in a way, it's a kind of example for all of us to follow.
Yeah. Is there any education component to this in terms of going into the schools? Or, I mean, I know it's just premiering.
No, but there are things, I live in Rome, so I'm not here in the schools.
Oh, rub it in.
But, but Daniel Harvey, who may be here in the audience, is involved very much in making sure that it's in the community and in the schools. And so I think very much so, and I think it's also part of the mission of Opera Parallèle. This is not a feature of a one-time off. This is something that's part of the DNA of the company.
Yeah. Well, we're going to hear another aria, and this is a piece with both Harvey Milk and George Moscone. Tell us about their relationship and how it's expressed.
I think, first of all, I'd like to say that I think this is one of the most important scenes in the opera. Because it really shows you both the things that they shared, the humanity of George Moscone, the politics of the time that were riven by, they both came from ethnic groups that were shunned previously, and they have a kind of common bond over the fact that they've risen through this and made it to this place and become real allies. At the same time, Harvey Milk, when George Moscone won't do what he wants, tells him, if he does what he thinks he's going to do, he's going to make sure he never gets elected again.
Just be more specific. What are they talking about?
Well, they're talking about Dan White. Sorry, they're talking about Dan White being reappointed. Dan White had resigned. That he did without telling anybody, in typical Dan White fashion. And then some forces came together with finances and some things to help him out. And he decided he wanted his job back. Well, the mayor had said initially, I think we can work it out. And Harvey Milk said, no way. And if you do that, we'll make sure you don't get reelected, even though they were allies and they were elected together. And I think very important friends for many different reasons. But that was the threat.
Yeah. And then what, in terms of the dynamic between these two men who were allies, maybe they were friends, but they were certainly political allies, but this is a moment of conflict.
Well, no, it's not just a moment of conflict. And I think you'll see it when you hear them sing the part, Moscone and Milk. It's really about shared inheritance. George starts off and he says, what did your daddy do, Harvey? Mine was a prison guard. And Harvey says, mine was a Jewish grocer. What's your point, George? And he says, a grocer. Interesting. So it's a real conversation, which you don't often see in an opera, and it was a very hard scene actually originally to conceive. But you feel the humanity between these two men who were murdered on the same day in San Francisco.
Yeah. Let's bring out Opera Parallèle to hear this performance. And I should say that the entire opera is going to be premiering May 31st at the Yerba Buena Center,
Exactly.
right? And,
Please come.
Yeah, and June 1st, 6th, and 7th, I think. Yeah.
June 1, June 6th and 7th too, yes.
All right.
And you'll hear many of the things that you heard today, and what I think has been an excellent program. You'll hear many of those things really come to life, including Harvey Milk's last will and testament with his actual voice. So the ghost of Harvey Milk is in the room.
Yeah. All right, let's welcome Michael Kelly, Matt Baylor, and Kevin Korth.
Which way do you go?
Time out. Did I just hear what I heard? Easy, Harvey. I'm up for re-election. If Danny Boy is all they want, hell, let me throw 'em a bone. I'm #1 queen with a big bone in my pocket. Remember, the Castro elected you. What did your daddy do, Harvey? Mine was a prison guard, a good Italian Catholic, and strong disciplinarian. Mine was a Jewish grocer. What's your point, George? A grocer. Interesting. A religious man, more so than I. And yet you have a strongly ingrained ethnic identity. The draw for me is not religious. It's cultural. I see. Like somehow your faith transcends the faith itself. What would your daddy call that? Chutzpah! It's been a long haul for both of us, hasn't it? I want you to know, pal, in all of that time, I've never made a deal I'm ashamed of. I've come close, but I've found better ways. Faith in the system, faith in the people, faith in friends, faith in friends, faith in friends, Harvey, friends, faith in friends, Harvey, like you. I too have my own sort of belief system. It's worked out all right. I think I've made a pretty good mayor. You have, George, and have faith if you fight me. I'll see you don't get re-elected, dog catcher. I see you've read your Machiavelli. Another god Italian.
Let's talk in the morning.
All right, Opera Parallèle, Matt Baylor as Moscone, Michael Kelly as Harvey Milk. Kind of looked a little bit like him, I thought. And Kevin Corton on the piano. I want to thank you all so much for coming. Thanks to the KQED Live team for making tonight possible. Thanks to you for being here, and thanks to everybody who watched online. Hopefully you'll join us for our next KQED Live event, which is May 29th. It is a burrito day. I think that's what it's called. Burrito Showdown. So come hungry. And the list of all the benefits of being a KQED member can be found online, but also if you scan that QR code, if you didn't have a chance to do that. Thank you all so much for coming. Have a great night and a great weekend.